Please welcome Mark Bittman, former New York Times opinion columnist on food, author of A Bone to Pick.
The former thing is pretty interesting. I have a talk. But you know, I hear Jill say this stuff. It's just so sensible that it makes me mad. And you know, I think a lot of the stuff I'm going to say is pretty sensible, and there isn't a lot new here. We have had good ideas about how to fix and change the food system for, I don't know, Joan Gussow was here, 30 years, 40 years. It's just infuriating. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm going to read my talk. Right about at the time of this conference last year, my friends Ricardo Salvador, Michael Pollan, Olivier de Schutter, and I published a brief opinion column calling for national food policy. Not everyone ignored it, thankfully. Earlier this month, the four of us published a longer, expanded version of our thoughts on a national food policy. And joining forces with the muscle of the Union of Concerned Scientists, Food Policy Action, and Movement Strategy Center, we are going to try to stoke the eating public to ask presidential candidates and candidates for other offices what they intend to do to improve the state of our food system. You'll hear more about that from Tom Colicchio and Celinda Lake just before lunch today. If someone says to me, why do we need a national food policy? I say we need a national food policy because we don't have one. The result of not having one, we can see. It's anarchy, it's inaction, it's bad health, it's environmental damage, and it's the determination of food policy, not by those who have the interests of American people at heart, but by those who can make money processing, producing, and marketing food. There's nothing wrong with making money on those things, but there is a difference between growing corn for high fructose corn syrup and growing corn for tortillas that might be served with a hearty stew and some cabbage. And a national food policy would help with that. 8 years ago, when George W. Bush was still president, I started writing about larger food issues for the Times, first in the old Week in Review section, and then as an opinion columnist. I was young and naive, except I wasn't really young. But I was naive. I thought some food issues were such low-hanging fruit that our sure-to-be progressive and aware incoming president would see these injustices and start fixing them immediately. All we needed were a few cabinet positions filled with forward-thinking people, and the lights would come on. That fruit is still low-hanging. Other than a notable and commendable improvement in school lunch programs 5 years ago, some belated but welcome restrictions on trans fats, a symbolic garden of debatable value, and some inadequate adjustments to the dietary guidelines, the official view about how Americans should eat, this administration and its officials have pretty much ignored critical issues in food just as pointedly as they ignored our call to integrate policy around food. That's a huge disappointment. Thanks to the public health efforts of the 19th and 20th centuries, communicable diseases currently account for a minority of deaths in the United States. Most deaths are caused by what are now called chronic diseases, and many, if not most of those, are preventable by a sound diet, a diet that's almost the opposite of that which the dominant environment creates. That's the public health challenge of the 21st century, and we're ignoring it. There are about 100 gun deaths per day in the United States, and with the right legislation, most of those are preventable. But so are most deaths from diabetes, and there are 200 per day of those, along with another 600 that list diabetes as an underlying cause. And the biggest risk factor for type 2 diabetes, once called adult onset diabetes because kids didn't get it, is diet. And as you know, kids get adult onset diabetes all the time now. In fairness, this administration has been better about food than any of the recent previous ones. But the next one has to pay far more attention to diet and agriculture. There are a dozen or more important issues around these twin topics of diet and ag, and I'm going to talk about 3 or 4 of the most glaring. Those that don't center around social issues like income inequality and justice center around 2 things: the way we produce, market, and eat animals, and the way we produce, market, and eat junk. Let's start with the routine use of antibiotics in livestock production. Chickens and pigs are prophylactically fed antibiotics in order to prevent diseases that in large part are the result of the conditions in which the animals are raised. Yet it's been demonstrated in other countries that these animals can still be raised in improved but still lousy conditions, but still profitable conditions, and avoid disease without antibiotics. Other than the natural objections to the presence of drugs in food and the environment, antibiotics are now found in groundwater, rivers, soil, and elsewhere. Industrially raised animals have become a breeding ground for what are called superbugs, antibiotic-resistant bacteria that are responsible for more than 20,000 deaths a year. There's an ongoing lawsuit brought by NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and others against FDA, which could change all this. The suit has actually won a couple of times, and judges have ordered FDA to mandate the end of the use of prophylactic antibiotics in animal production. But the most recent court ruling was in favor of FDA, which insists it can control antibiotic use by asking producers to self-regulate, a tactic that always fails. And now they're asking pharmaceutical companies to switch their labels so they're no longer selling antibiotics for growth promotion. Drug companies have agreed to abide by this by December 2016, but it's all lame because there's no mention of prophylaxis, which is essentially the same as growth production. I spoke with a White House official about this 2 years ago. He reported that the government had the matter in hand because Homeland Security was working on stronger antibiotics. This is the equivalent of building a bigger hydrogen bomb instead of negotiating a peace treaty. The good news, as is so often the case in food and ag, is that California has just passed into law a good bill that actually limits prophylactic use of antibiotics in animal production. Maryland and Oregon are working on similar bills. The chicken industry and some fast food chains, notably McDonald's, Chipotle, and Chick-fil-A, have either committed to or said they commit to antibiotic-free chickens. NRDC probably deserves credit for that. The writing is on the wall, but the Obama administration did little to help in this arena, and it could have. Which brings us to CAFOs, or confined animal feeding operations, the now familiar assembly line meat factories that not only treat animals like widgets and encourage the growth of superbugs, but consume enormous amounts of energy, pollute water supplies, generate significant greenhouse gases, and require ever-increasing amounts of corn, soy, and other grains, a dependency that's led to the destruction of vast swaths of the world's green grasslands and tropical rainforests. We don't even know how many CAFOs there are today. The Environmental Protection Agency is either unable or unwilling to track them. But it's certainly in the many thousands, and the total number of animals and sites is growing. In 2008, excuse me, if someone could bring me some water, I'd appreciate that. In 2008, the Pew Commission on Industrial Farm Animal Production made 24 consensus recommendations about CAFOs. The President said he'd enact all 24 of these. Thank you very much. The President said he'd enact all 24 of these. He acted on none. Note the label-free bottle. We're very principled. He acted on none. So CAFOs are essentially unregulated, despite pumping waste and other pollutants into the environment at unprecedented rates. If you ask government officials what's been done to limit the impact or growth of CAFOs, you get an answer like, we're addressing antibiotic use. See above. It's true that EPA has moved to reduce nutrients flowing into the Chesapeake Bay, and an industry challenge to this was defeated. Though the process is slow and limited, this is work that the next administration can continue. EPA is often well-intended, and it has the power of the Clean Water Act behind it, but it's also underfunded and overwhelmed by the general hostility of USDA, which is industry-friendly and has stood firmly in the way of progress. Again, to get good news about CAFOs, you have to go to the state, county, and even township level, almost always in places that have seen firsthand how destructive these operations are. The biggest successes have been the result of the Humane Society, whose campaigns have forced multinationals like Smithfield and again McDonald's to at least give lip service to improving things by eliminating the torturous stalls, I should say by promising to eliminate the torturous stalls known as gestational crates, and to begin to change the way chickens are raised. But again, it's not clear that industry representatives are actually keeping their promises. A little tiny bit off topic, but it's probably worth saying that things will only get worse if the Trans-Pacific Partnership is ratified, and here again the Obama administration has been on the wrong side. And now we come to the saddest inaction of all, in my opinion, the limiting of marketing junk food to kids. When I started writing the opinion column, I was sure that the Obamas, with their love of children and concern about preventive health, would be on this in a minute. I was wrong. I've spoken even here in this room last year about the benefits of the 2010 Healthy, Hungry, Free Kids Act and commended the administration for it. But that act, which is itself threatened, doesn't have much impact on marketing outside of schools. It's significant, but it's not nearly enough. This is so heartbreaking, I almost don't know how to talk about it. It goes without saying that if you want healthy adults, you have to start with healthy children. If you want adults who know how to eat, you have to teach children how to eat. And allowing marketers to peddle poison to 2-year-olds without restrictions is not going to allow that to happen. I didn't mention before that 1 in 3 of today's children is expected to develop type 2 diabetes in their lifetimes. Yet it's becoming harder, not easier, to challenge marketing junk to kids, largely because of reactionary interpretations of the First Amendment. Progress is slow and almost painful to describe, like a county-by-county restriction on toys and meals. San Francisco, to its credit, is trying to pass a law requiring warning labels on sugar-sweetened beverage advertisements, as well as a ban on advertising on some city property. They're being sued by a cynical and desperate industry. New York State just introduced a bill to prohibit the sales of oversized, that is greater than 16 ounces, sugar-sweetened beverages to children under a certain age, which is effectively an ID rule. That's the right course. 16 ounces of soda, by the way, has probably 14 teaspoons of sugar in it. The current administration deserves no credit for this, and of all the inaction there's been, this is the most head-smacking. Head-smacking. Some future generation is going to curse us roundly for our inactivity around this. The Obama administration has recently been quite aggressive on climate change, although it and most of the rest of us, including most climate change activists, ignore the role of industrial agriculture and diet. That's a mistake. Fixing the food system will not only keep us from roasting the planet, but will save the lives of many humans and those of other species more immediately. Changing diet is largely a question of environment, and I don't only mean the food system's awful effect on our environment, but the environment the food system creates and its impact on us personally. When choices are bad, we make bad choices. If I give you a choice between Hot Pockets and pizza and lean cuisine and a frozen burrito and a double cheeseburger and Lunchables and Count Chocula, I'm putting you in an environment where the good choice is either hard to find or doesn't exist. That's what our food system is doing, creating an environment where the healthy choice, the good choice, can only be found by making an effort. Without an effort, without sustained effort, we'll make bad choices, and that will doom us. You may not immediately see the links among killing people via diabetes and chronic diseases and killing people via global warming. But if you acknowledge agriculture's role in greenhouse gas production, and you acknowledge its role in producing junk food and tainted animal products, the problems are very closely affiliated indeed. In fact, these things right here, diet, the environment, climate change, health, are tightly interwoven, and that's not coincidental. You cannot establish an agricultural system either intentionally or anarchically, as ours was established, without affecting the environment. You cannot establish an agricultural system without affecting diet and therefore health. You cannot make desirable changes in diet and health without making desirable changes in the agricultural system. You cannot make desirable changes in diet and health without affecting the environment. This is what's called the coupled system. Change in one means change in all. Diet is health. Diet is about what we grow. Diet is about environmental impact. And all of those things are about diet. It's a coupled system. If we absorb that, if we unpack that, we'd have a national food policy. I'd like to pause to define sustainability. Sustainability is the capacity to endure. The most conservative and reliable estimates of industrial ag's contribution to greenhouse gases exceeds 10%, which ranks it in the top 3 offenders. And since increasingly most diseases are environmental, that is, non-genetic, and many of those are caused by diet, you have a food system that poisons the planet and destroys health. That's the worst food system you could have, and it cannot endure. It's unsustainable, and it needs to be regulated. Even some government officials are finally recognizing this, arguing that the current proposed dietary guidelines, which determine to a large extent how we eat, should include consideration of sustainability. Almost needless to say, the Department of Agriculture is officially against this. It's not the right place to discuss it, they say. Yet there's no more important time or place to have this discussion. We hear a great deal about the effect of climate change on agriculture. Changing temperatures, extreme weather events, drought, these are all terrible for farmers and ranchers. But agriculture isn't just an industry falling victim to environmental stress and degradation. It's a system that causes those things. And we hear almost nothing about the impact of agriculture on climate change. We know that transportation is a big producer of greenhouse gases, so we devote a lot of attention to vehicle emissions and energy efficiency standards. And that's important because transportation accounts for 15% of greenhouse gas emissions. But ag is right behind. And contrary to what you might think, this isn't about food miles, though those do matter. It's about these 3 drivers: tropical deforestation, which is mostly for livestock; monoculture, which is largely for livestock and junk food; and the improper use of synthetic nitrogen fertilizers, also mostly about animals and junk food. We've cleared about 40% of the land on Earth for various purposes. Though at this point more than half of the world's population lives in urban and suburban areas, cities account for just 1% of this land. The rest is agriculture. Look out the window the next time you fly cross country and you'll see it yourself. How much land are we talking about here? How much is in cultivation? About the same size as South America, all of it. And that's not all, that's cultivated land. We use more land than that for grazing, about the size of Africa. And in order to support 2 continents worth of land to make money, biofuel, meat, and fruits and vegetables, agriculture accounts for over 90% of freshwater consumption and degradation. But meat production deserves special treatment, especially since the global demand for it has multiplied in recent years. Everyone wants to eat like an American, yet if everyone did, we'd need 4 Earths to produce enough meat. Last time I looked, we had 1. Thanks to growing affluence, growing marketing, and the global proliferation of CAFOs I spoke about earlier, global meat production and consumption are increasing. Proponents of the current system argue we have to feed the world. But as I said right here a year ago, the real solution to hunger is reducing inequality and poverty. And the solution to other forms of malnutrition, the kinds that are so prevalent in the United States, the kinds I've been talking about, is to change our diet. Changing the standard American diet has the power to produce the ripple effect of ending malnutrition, reducing chronic disease, and markedly slowing the generation of greenhouse gases. Experts who are serious in disease reduction recommend that adults eat just over a half pound of meat a week. Meanwhile, in the United States and most other English-speaking countries, we eat about a half pound a day. What's worse, meat and junk food, and the staggering quantities of them that we eat, have largely been produced with the support of our government agencies and at the expense of a more health and earth-friendly diet. The news, of course, isn't all bad. There are farmers around the country and around the world, setting examples of how to grow food sustainably and efficiently. At the same time, scientists and policymakers are coming up with viable solutions if only we'd attend to them. That's all promising because it helps us think about policies that can support these types of practices. We know part of the reason many farmers do it wrong is that our policies encourage them to by providing perverse financial incentives. Imagine, as Jill outlined, if we shifted incentives, if we shifted support and attention to practices that are truly sustainable. There's no silver bullet to fix a broken food system, but sustainable farming practices echo climate change mitigation strategies, those very strategies called for by the International Panel on Climate Change in their most recent report. But as meat and dairy consumption rises worldwide, so does the amount of cropland that goes to feeding these animals rather than feeding people directly, a process that drastically reduces the efficiency of the calories we invest. You probably know that it takes roughly 5 times as many calories to produce a pound of beef as it does to produce a pound of grain. All that means is that if we target crop production used for animal feed and other non-food uses like ethanol, and instead use that cropland for direct consumption, we could feed a lot more people on the same amount of land while reducing greenhouse gases and chronic disease. Everyone knows this, so there are literally dozens of legitimate policy initiatives that will achieve these goals. The problem is that without a national food policy, without official guidance, we can barely get any of them considered, much less implemented. This reduces us to impotence in the public policy arena and forces us to take a look at our personal food policies. I'd like you to allow me a couple minutes on that, and then I'll be done. It follows from all of this that reducing our consumption of junk food and animal products can reduce our personal carbon footprint. For example, if we were to reduce meat consumption by just 20%, it would be as if we all switched from a standard sedan to a Prius. And while we engage in this system with each meal, I don't want to reduce this issue of global magnitude to a decision at the tip of your fork. It is not your fault. It is not our fault. Still, we're not absolved from responsibility. And by taking responsibility, we can improve our own lives. This is what I was talking about at the beginning. What's good for you is good for the planet. There's a near perfect alignment here. There are ways we can work on political issues, but fixing our personal food policy is the most straightforward thing we can do, what we have the most control over. I know you're all well-educated and you know much of this, but you're also influencers. So from now to the end of this talk, which is soon, I'm going to talk about the 2 things that people can do to make their own food policies better: reduce their carbon footprints and take control of their health. I'm not anti-meat. Like some of you in this room, I tackled a sizable goat shank last night. But I am what you might call less meatarian. Because global warming was unforeseen, even into the early fossil fuel era, in a more ignorant age not so long ago, we didn't perceive that pollution did more than cause bad visibility and perhaps a few lung diseases here and there, as if that weren't bad enough. But the current health crisis is a little more the work of an evil empire. We know what a good diet is now. Ignorance is no longer an excuse. Overconsumption of animals, and especially junk food, is the problem, along with our paltry consumption of plants. The evidence that plants promote health is overwhelming. You eat more plants, less other stuff, you live longer and healthier lives, period. But, and we all know this to be true, the foods we're most encouraged to eat, the place where almost all the marketing dollars in food goes, is in junk food and meat. And one of those is useless from the get-go, and the other is harmful to the planet and our bodies in large quantities. So let's figure something out. 2 rules, only 2, can govern a personal food policy. This all starts with the definition of food, which the Department of Agriculture is too lame or corrupt to figure out. The dictionary says, it's not funny. The dictionary says that food is any nutritious substance that people or animals eat or drink, or that plants absorb in order to maintain life and growth. Hold that for a second. Nutritious, by the way, means wholesome, full of nutrients, good for you, it means good for you, not really good for you, not like Wonder Bread good for you. I want to, while you're holding that in your brain, I want to also define poison. Poison is a substance that's capable of causing the illness or death of a living organism when introduced or absorbed. Some large percentage of what's sold in supermarkets and fast food joints is by definition closer to poison than it is to food. It causes more illness than health. Not in single doses, it's true, but a regular diet of sugary foods, of highly processed foods, of foods with fake ingredients, is a diet that's not relying on food and a diet that's likely to cause illness, a diet that relies on poison. So the first rule is this: define what food is. You define it for yourself. I don't really care where you draw the line, but draw it somewhere. Is soda food? No. Are so-called health bars that have the same nutritional profile as Snickers food? No. Is anything, including yogurt, that gets 50% or more of its calories from sugar, worth calling food? No. Is a chip, and I don't care whether it's a so-called whole grain chip or a Pringle, is a chip that gets 90% of its calories from chemically extracted oil whose basis is monoculture grown corn or soy food? No. So how do you find food? What is food? The reigning wisdom, people still say this to me, is to shop the perimeter of the supermarket. But that's no longer true. The marketers saw that you figured that out, and now they put the bakery on the perimeter. They put the deli on the perimeter. They put the prepared food and the candies on the perimeter. They put the candies in the fruit and vegetable aisles. They don't care. Here's how to shop the supermarket. Buy food. Decide what's food and stick to that. Buy food, eat food. The second rule is this. This one's even simpler. Eat more foods from the plant kingdom this week than you did last week, and then eat more next week than you did this week, and then eat more next month than you did this month, and next year than last year, and so on. First, eliminate non-foods from your diet as best you can, and there are no hard and fast rules. You don't have to be a monk. I ate potato chips yesterday, and I'm okay with that. And then within that diet, eat more fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes, and grains. Don't worry about nutrition. Don't obsess about protein. Eat some animal products if you like, but be moderate in eating them and source them well. If you eat less meat, fewer eggs, and so on, you can afford to buy better stuff and to support farmers who are doing things the right way. We can continue to enjoy our food as we eat well and even better. You'll do that today and tomorrow. We can continue to search for the ingredients we love and spin yarns about our favorite meals. But we can reduce not only our calories, but our carbon footprint. We can make food more important, not less, and save ourselves by doing so. There's more talk about climate change than ever, but we're not all talking about the right culprits or pointing to the right solutions. This isn't to say that fossil fuels aren't a problem and that reducing reliance on them isn't a priority, but so too is reducing the devastating impact of agricultural policies and the far too powerful reign of corporate agribusiness on the health of our people and our planet. We must pay attention to that, both in our private lives and in our public ones. We have a health policy. We have an energy policy. Needless to say, they're both flawed. But when it comes to a food policy, we don't even have a flawed one. We have to start there, at least. Thank you.